Hello, my name is Darnetta Bolton from the Orland Park Library, and I'm here to talk to you today about homeschooling assessments. So, if you've made it this far through our Homeschooling 101 series, you've probably also made it to the end of your school year. So, congratulations for making it to the end of your school year. Such a huge feat, and you have so much to be proud of. But you might also be wondering, now that I've made it to the end of the school year, how do I know that my children have learned the things that they should know? Or how should I assess them to evaluate what we were learning this year? So today's talk is about a few ways you can use assessments to evaluate your homeschool for the year. Now, to begin, I want to start off by saying that in the state of Illinois, homeschoolers are not required by law to do formal assessments at the end of the year. This means that your kids do not have to take a standardized test and they don't have anyone that they need to report those scores to. However, there might be some reasons that you would want to do some formal assessment anyway. So a few of those reasons might be, one, that taking standardized tests will help them to practice for the future, because there will be a day that your homeschooled student will still need to take a formal test such as the SAT, the ACT, or any other college prep test. So this might be a good opportunity to test them now to get them in the practice or habit of sitting down to take a test. You might also decide that some of the curriculum you used this year didn't work for you and you want to switch to a new program. And if that's the case, then you might want to switch, or you might want to use a formal assessment to help you evaluate where your student is now and then decide how you want to switch. There might also be plans in your student's future to attend either a public or private school. So you may have homeschooled this year because of COVID, or you may know that in the next couple of years your student will have to go to high school or to some other public school setting or formal school setting. So if that's the case, then you may want to use your standardized tests to evaluate them so that you can have records in case they need it in the future. And the last reason you might want to do it is just to evaluate where you were this year and to decide how you would like to plan your curriculum for next year. So there's three types of assessments that we'll talk about today. The first one is just standardized testing, which most of us are familiar with. The second would be portfolios. And the third is an evaluation process. So first, in standardized tests, many of us took these tests when we were in school. These are the tests like the Iowa test that school students take every year. As a homeschooling parent, you are able to schedule for your student to take these standardized tests. So they're familiar, they're usually just fill in the blank or bubble. Now sometimes the publishers may provide you a digital format in order to take the test. The tests are regulated by a third party, and usually there is some sort of proctor. So now there are also options where the parent can proctor, but usually there is a proctor. So these tests include the Iowa test, the Stanford, an LSAT, and then there's also a cognitive abilities test. And these can be found at bjupress.com. We'll have a link with some videos and some websites you can follow up on at the end of this video. So the standardized testing option is something that most parents are familiar with. You would first go into the website and you would request whatever grade level your student needs to be tested in, and then you could either get a paper version or you could also get an online version of the test. And each testing company has their different requirements. So I would advise that if you chose that route, to be careful and clear about the instructions. Go back on those websites and read over them just to make sure you understand. And if you choose an online option, typically there are requirements that your computer needs to meet in order for you to proctor it on an online platform. So the second option for assessments is portfolios. Now this might be a little different. Some people may not be familiar with it, but we have always heard of students going to art schools and they have to carry a portfolio of their work. A homeschooling portfolio is very similar to this. It is just a packet or a binder or a folder of information that shows what your student has learned for the year. So while it's not a standardized test in the sense of filling in the blanks and bubbles, it does provide an assessment of the year, and it shows what your student has accomplished for the year. So some of the things that you would include in your curated portfolio would be your grade records. So if your child is in high school, this would include formal transcripts, record samples, work samples, any book lists that your child followed for the year. So if you had a literature book list, you would include that. You could include your attendance records and hours of instruction, keeping in mind in the state of Illinois where we're recording this video, that is not a requirement. However, that is still something that you could include in that. Any test scores that they've had for the year, so any math tests or science tests or anything that you've tested them on for the year. Any awards and achievements, if they're a part of any other extracurricular activities, you could include that. And I would also say if your child is in a writing class or and has written essays, a lot of homeschoolers are in those classes, then you could also include a few samples of their written essays for the year. So that is the portfolios. So now the third option would just be to have your child evaluated. And this is typically an assessment that is done by a certified teacher or another education professional. You would ask that person to come into your home and provide some sort of evaluation. Again, in some states, this is required. In the state of Illinois, it is not required. However, you can find someone in the state of Illinois to do that if you would prefer. So typically what the evaluator would do is come into your home and they would take the portfolio. So this is kind of goes along with the portfolio. You would have a portfolio or a packet of information that you would provide to the evaluator, and then they would take a look through that information, and they would also probably speak with you and the child to give some sort of assessment. Now, this can be also used in the case that your child needs an IEP, which is used for special services in the school systems. And for homeschoolers, sometimes it's called an ISP, which is an individual service plan. So sometimes if your child has any needs like services such as speech, or if they need to be evaluated for ADHD, dyslexia, or any other type of behavioral assessment, that is usually the time when you would provide this information to the evaluator, and they would assess that information, assess your student, and then they would give you some sort of evaluation at the end to decide what kind of services your child will qualify for, or what kind of services they would be needing. In the case of an evaluation like this, I would say also to be very careful and to keep all copies of correspondence. Typically, you are provided some sort of correspondence after either via email, it's usually in person and via email, and you will get a written or typed out copy of the results of the evaluation. So just be careful to keep that and to file that in the box or file that you have for your students' schoolwork for that year. So these are the three formal assessments: the standardized testing, the portfolio, and an evaluation done by an education professional. And these are the most common ways that homeschoolers would probably evaluate. Now, there are formal assessments, and there are some ways to do an informal assessment if you would prefer that. Now, for kids that are in the younger grades, like kindergarten through maybe second grade, some parents may feel that it's a little too early to assess them with a standardized test or some formal assessments, and they might want to use some other strategies that are less formal. So I'll just give you a quick list of a few informal tools you could use for evaluating your younger students. The first would be observation. Because you're the homeschooling parent and you're with that child during their school day and school year, you can observe very closely where they are, what is it that they kind of know, and you can make a pretty good assessment on where they are and what you need to do to help fill in any gaps. Another informal tool is narration. So some educational philosophies employ this assessment method. Usually Charlotte Mason educators are probably more familiar with narration, but lots of other homeschoolers use it. It's basically use, if you, for example, if you read a story to your child and during your read aloud time, and instead of giving them a worksheet or some sort of fill in the blank prompts, you would ask them, can you tell me back the story I just read, or the portion of the story I just read? Or you would give them a few minutes to just discuss with you, tell back what they learned, and you would discuss with them what you all heard. So that is a very good tool for comprehension, because if the child wasn't paying attention, they wouldn't be able to tell you back what they learned. Along with narration would be discussions. Discussions can go along with any subject area from math, science, literature, and you can use this method to evaluate informally if your student is comprehending and following the material. You could also do some informal questioning and quizzes. So it's not necessarily that you would write the quiz down and say, sit down, I'm gonna give you a 10-minute quiz. But after you work on your science lesson for the day, you could ask, so what are the plant types we talked about today? Can you tell me what happens during photosynthesis? And this is similar to a quiz, but it's just not written, it's oral, and you can get a good idea of the comprehension level and understanding. One more would be projects. You could assign your child a project to review concepts that have been learned for the year. And you could also assign them journal writings. So daily writings or weekly journal writings or journal entries to review and recap some of the things they've learned. And lastly, you could use some sort of a checklist. And this could be easy for your kindergarten and first grade students. You could have a simple checklist of things that you wanted to accomplish throughout the year. Things could be as basic as learning to tie shoes, and more complex as learning phonics, learning CVC words, and things of that nature. So you could just have a quick checklist. These are the things that I hope to teach my child this year, and you can do a midway and an end of year informal assessment and just go through that with the child and see, can they tie the shoes? Can they read those CVC words? Can they do any other things that you may have listed on that list? So now the informal tools and standardized tests can be done at your discretion. They don't have to be done, the informal ones specifically do not have to be done at the end of the year. I will say that standardized testing, they usually do provide specific dates. So there's a window of time that you will be provided that test. So if you choose to use the standardized testing option, you would need to go onto the website to get more information, because those are specific windows of time that you'll be allowed to get that test and get the results. But the informal evaluations, the assessments done by an evaluator, or even your portfolio, they can be done at the end of the year, but you can also start to put things in those places throughout the year. So hopefully this gives you just a general idea of some ways you can assess your homeschooled students this year and in years to come. There are a few websites that we will post so that you can refer to them, and that's where I got most of the information from this video. The Homeschool Legal Defense Association is a very great resource. I also got a lot of information from BJU Press, homeschool.com. They have lots of information and specifically ways that you can order and request standardized testing. And also www.sahomeschoolers.org is a good place to go to get more information for assessment. So again, this will be posted on our website under our Homeschooling 101 series. Hopefully you have found some new tips and ways that you can evaluate your student, and we look forward to seeing you in the library soon. Again, Darnetta Bolton from the Orland Park Library, and I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful end of your homeschooling year. Bye-bye.